In late November 1950, United Nations forces were deep inside North Korea, advancing toward the Yalu River and the border with China. Among them were thousands of US Marines and soldiers moving through a remote mountain region around the Chosin Reservoir. They had already survived months of brutal fighting, and many believed the Korean War was approaching its final stage. Then the weather changed. Winter arrived with extraordinary force. Temperatures plunged far below freezing. Snow covered the narrow mountain roads, and icy winds swept through the valleys. Weapons became harder to operate. Vehicles struggled to start, and exposed soldiers faced a danger that could kill as surely as enemy fire. But the cold was not the greatest threat. For weeks, Chinese forces had been moving secretly into North Korea. Large formations crossed the mountains at night, often avoiding detection by traveling through difficult terrain and maintaining strict discipline. American commanders knew Chinese troops had entered the war, but they did not fully understand the scale of the forces gathering around them. By November 27th, the situation changed completely. As darkness fell around the Chosin Reservoir, bugles and whistles echoed through the mountains. Chinese soldiers emerged from the darkness and attacked positions held by US Marines and Army units. The attacks came from multiple directions. Roads and mountain passes that had seemed secure were suddenly threatened. Units that had been advancing north were forced to turn and defend themselves. The United Nations forces were no longer simply advancing. They were surrounded. The battlefield was a frozen maze of steep hills, narrow roads, and deep valleys. Reinforcements were difficult to move, and every mile of road mattered. Yet the Marines and soldiers began organizing a defense. They established positions around the reservoir, protected vital roads, and prepared for attacks that continued through the night. The fighting was only beginning. Behind the immediate battlefield, an even larger problem was becoming clear. The Chinese forces were not making a single attack. They were attempting to destroy the entire United Nations force in the area. And if the road south was cut, there might be no way out. For the men trapped around the reservoir, the mission had changed in a single night. They were no longer marching toward the end of the war. They were preparing for a fight to escape. By the morning of November 28, 1950, the men around the Chosin Reservoir understood that they were facing something far larger than a local attack. Chinese forces had struck from several directions during the night, cutting roads and surrounding isolated positions. Some units were already fighting desperately to prevent themselves from being completely overrun. But the Marines and soldiers had one advantage. They still controlled the main road leading south. That road was their lifeline. It connected the scattered positions around the reservoir and offered the only realistic route toward safety. Losing it would mean losing the ability to move ammunition, fuel, food, and wounded soldiers. The Chinese understood this too. Their attacks became increasingly focused on the road. At night, waves of Chinese troops moved through the freezing darkness, attempting to block the route and destroy the retreating columns. During daylight, American aircraft attacked enemy positions and helped keep the road open. The weather made everything worse. Temperatures dropped to around 30 degrees and 34 degrees in some areas. Metal became painfully cold to touch. Vehicle engines struggled to start. Weapons and ammunition could malfunction. Water froze inside containers, while medical treatment became extremely difficult. For wounded soldiers, the cold was almost as dangerous as their injuries. Despite these conditions, the surrounded forces began preparing for a fighting withdrawal. The plan was not simply to run south. They would have to move as a fighting column, protecting engineers as they repaired damaged roads, securing hills overlooking the route, and recovering vehicles that broke down along the way. Every mile would have to be earned. One of the most important positions was Toktung Pass, where a Marine unit fought to keep the road open between the main forces and the troops farther south. The fighting there became critical. If the Chinese succeeded in controlling the pass, the American forces around the reservoir could be split apart. For several days, isolated Marines fought to hold their positions while surrounded by enemy forces. Meanwhile, the main column slowly prepared to move. Tanks were placed where they could protect the road. Trucks were organized into long convoys. Wounded men were loaded into vehicles whenever space was available. Everyone understood the same terrifying reality. The road south was open, but it was surrounded by an enemy that wanted to close it. The Marines had been ordered to withdraw, but there would be no easy retreat. They would have to fight their way out of the frozen mountains. By early December, the United Nations forces around the Chosin Reservoir had one objective: reach the coast. The route south remained open, but only barely. Chinese troops controlled many of the surrounding ridges and repeatedly attacked the column as it moved through the mountains. Engineers worked under fire and freezing temperatures to repair roads, while tanks and infantry protected the vehicles carrying ammunition and wounded men. The withdrawal became a moving battlefield. During daylight, aircraft attacked enemy positions and helped the column advance. At night, Chinese forces used the darkness to launch new assaults, trying to block the road or isolate individual units. The men could not simply stop. Every halt increased the danger of being surrounded again. One of the most important battles occurred at Toktung Pass, where Marines fought to keep the road open. Their position connected the forces around the reservoir with the main column farther south. If the pass fell, thousands of Marines could be cut off. For days, surrounded, Marines resisted repeated attacks while supplies became scarce and temperatures remained brutally low. Eventually, the road was secured. The trapped forces could continue their withdrawal. As the column moved south, it passed through frozen valleys and narrow mountain roads, filled with abandoned equipment and wrecked vehicles. Some soldiers walked beside trucks because there was not enough room inside. Others carried wounded comrades while trying to keep pace with the advancing convoy. But the Chinese pressure never disappeared. The final obstacle was the port of Hungnam, where ships waited to evacuate the remaining United Nations forces. By December 11th, the survivors reached the coast. The battle had cost the United Nations forces thousands of casualties, but the core of the American Marine Division had escaped destruction. More than 100,000 people, including military personnel and Korean civilians, were eventually evacuated from Hungnam. The Chosin Reservoir campaign became one of the defining episodes of the Korean War. The men who survived had endured overwhelming enemy numbers, brutal terrain, and some of the coldest conditions faced by American troops in modern warfare. The battle did not end the Korean War, but it proved something that would remain important for the rest of the conflict. Even when surrounded, the United Nations forces could still fight their way out, and the frozen mountains of Chosin would forever be remembered as the place where an army refused to disappear.